There's a town in Alaska where the sun doesn't rise for 65 days straight. Not cloudy days, not short days. Complete darkness from mid-November through January. Average winter temperature, minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Distance to the nearest hospital if something goes wrong, 320 miles. Cost of a gallon of milk, $15. Population, nearly 5,000 people who looked at those numbers and said, yeah, we'll stay. That's not the most isolated place we're covering today. That's just number one. America has towns where winter doesn't mean shoveling your driveway or scraping your windshield. It means complete severance from the rest of civilization. Places where if you need medical help, you're waiting for weather to clear before a plane can reach you. Where your food comes on a barge that stops running when the river freezes. Where the only road out becomes impassable and you're stuck until spring decides to show up. We're not talking about charming New England villages with cozy fireplaces and farmers markets. We're talking about places where winter is a calculation, a risk assessment, a test of how much isolation you can psychologically handle before something inside you breaks. Today we're counting down 6 American towns where winter means you're completely on your own. From the dead-end town accessible by one flooding road through Canada to the place where 348 people endure 67 days of total darkness, to the town that gave up on traditional housing entirely and moved everyone into a single Cold War era building because going outside wasn't worth it anymore. These aren't ghost towns. People live here. They pay mortgages, raise kids, run businesses. But the difference between them and you is that when winter arrives, they're making peace with the fact that if something goes catastrophically wrong, help isn't coming until the weather changes. Think you know what isolation means? By the end of this video, your winter horror stories about traffic or delayed Amazon deliveries are going to sound adorable. Hit that subscribe button because by the end of this video, your biggest winter complaint will be, my Uber took too long. Let's start where isolation is still manageable. Barely? 6. Hyder, Alaska, the dead end town. We're starting in Hyder, Alaska, population 60 on a good day, tucked into the southeastern panhandle where Alaska meets British Columbia. This is as close to normal as this list gets, which should tell you everything about where we're headed. Hyder sits at the end of one road, not metaphorically, literally one road, and it doesn't go to the rest of Alaska. It goes through Canada. The nearest Alaskan town is Juneau, accessible only by boat or plane. If you want to drive anywhere from Hyder, you're driving through Stewart, British Columbia, and then you're on Canadian Highway 37A. That's it. That's the lifeline. Here's where winter gets interesting. That one road floods regularly. Heavy snowmelt, rain, or just bad timing, and suddenly that highway becomes a river. When that happens, Hyder stops existing on any meaningful map. No Amazon deliveries, no grocery runs, no driving to the hospital in Terrace, British Columbia, 240 miles away on a road that's currently underwater. According to U.S. Census data, Hyder's population has hovered between 60 and 87 for the past 2 decades. These aren't people who got stuck. These are people who chose this. The median home value sits around $150,000, about what a studio apartment parking space costs in San Francisco, except here it comes with an actual house, and the charming anxiety of wondering if you'll be able to leave next week. Winter temperatures average 20 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Hyder has no bank, no police force, no school. Medical emergencies mean hoping the road is passable or waiting for a helicopter if the weather cooperates. The local economy runs on summer tourism and fishing. In winter, it's subsistence living and a whole lot of waiting. One resident described it on Reddit perfectly. Living in Hyder is like being on a reality show where the challenge is, can you survive with 60 neighbors and 1 grocery run per month? Spoiler, most people tap out. Picture this, January in Hyder. You wake up at 3 a.m. to heavy rain. By morning, you watch your only connection to civilization disappear under 3 feet of glacial runoff. The water rises fast. You check your pantry and do the math. 2 weeks of food, maybe 3 if you ration. You're not scared exactly. You've done this before, but you're aware, very aware, that if something goes really wrong in the next week, you're waiting for the water to recede. Your phone buzzes. Community text chain, roads out again. Who needs what? Welcome to Hyder, where disaster prep is just called Tuesday. Would you live somewhere knowing that winter storms might cut you off from the outside world for days or weeks at a time? Yes, no, or I panic when my Wi-Fi goes out out for 5 minutes? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you thought one flooding road was limiting, wait until you hear about the town where the road exists but becomes impassable for 6 months. To 5. In McCarthy, Alaska, the 60-mile footbridge. McCarthy, Alaska, population 28, sits at the gateway to Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It's accessible by the McCarthy Road, a 60-mile unpaved former railroad bed that's less road and more suggestion of where a road used to be. McCarthy Road is one lane in places, rough, rocky, and prone to washouts. In summer, it's passable if you've got decent clearance and spare tires. In winter, it becomes a gamble with worse odds than a gas station lottery ticket. Heavy snow, ice, and zero maintenance mean that from November through March, that 60-mile road might as well be the surface of Mars. The nearest town with services is Katina, 60 miles away, population 122. From there, it's another 65 miles to Glenallen for an actual grocery store. That's 125 miles round trip for milk and eggs, assuming the road cooperates. The nearest hospital is over 120 miles away. If you have a medical emergency in McCarthy during winter, you're calling for a helicopter and hoping the weather gods feel generous. McCarthy exists because of copper mining history. The Kennecott mines operated until 1938, then everyone left. What remains is a handful of year-round residents who genuinely looked at society and said, "No thanks, I'll take my chances with grizzly bears in isolation." Homes list for $150,000 to $500,000, but good luck getting a mortgage. Banks aren't thrilled about financing property that's inaccessible half the year. One McCarthy resident summed it up: "We're not off the grid by accident. We're off the grid because the grid looked at McCarthy and decided it wasn't worth the extension cord." Winter temperatures average negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but can drop to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Heating costs are astronomical. Everything runs on propane or wood. If you run out midwinter, you're burning furniture. There's no cell service, only satellite phones and internet. No police, no fire department, no ambulance. Residents are trained in wilderness first aid because they have to be. Picture this: February in McCarthy. It's minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. You're carrying firewood, hit ice, and hear your ankle snap. The pain is immediate and excruciating. You drag yourself inside and grab your satellite phone. Weather check, storms moving in, visibility near zero. Helicopter can't fly today, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. You splint your ankle with duct tape and firewood. Take whatever pain meds you have and settle in for what might be days of waiting, alone. Because in McCarthy in winter, even with 27 neighbors scattered around, you're fundamentally alone when things go wrong. And if McCarthy feels isolated with a couple dozen neighbors, our next town has over 200 people and a supply chain that just stops when the river decides winter has arrived. For 4, Tanana, Alaska, the river freeze town. Tanana, Alaska, population 246, sits at the confluence of the Tanana and Yukon rivers. It's an Athabascan village occupied for thousands of years. The people here understand cold at a cellular level. Here's the trap: Tanana is accessible by winter ice road, summer barge, and year-round air service. But during spring and fall, when the river is freezing or thawing, the ice is too thin for vehicles but too thick for boats. For weeks at a time, twice a year, the only way in or out is by air. Expensive and weather dependent. U.S. Census data shows population has declined from over 300 in the 1990s to 246 today. Winter temperatures average minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but regularly drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. The record low is minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Negative 76. At those temperatures, your spit freezes before it hits the ground. Car engines won't start. Propane gels. Life becomes survival calculations. The supply chain is unforgiving. In summer, a barge comes up the Yukon River with fuel, food, building materials, everything for the year. If you didn't order it on the barge, you're flying it in at massive cost or doing without. A gallon of milk costs $10 to $12, more per ounce than a Starbucks latte. You're not buying dairy, you're making an investment. A bag of flour runs $15. Tanana has a school, health clinic, post office, and village store. Anything serious medically requires a flight to Fairbanks, 130 miles away, costing thousands. If weather's bad, you wait. Jobs are primarily school, village government, or seasonal work. Subsistence hunting and fishing aren't hobbies. They're economic survival. Median household income is below $30,000 annually. One Tanana resident described it this way: "People ask if I'm worried about climate change. I tell them I'm more worried about whether I ordered enough flour on the barge. Climate change is abstract future. Running out of food in January is concrete nightmare." Picture this: late October, the river is starting to freeze. Dark, dangerous slush. The last barge came 2 weeks ago. You're in the village store and realize with sinking dread you forgot to order something critical. Maybe medication, maybe a heating system part. The barge is gone. Ice isn't safe. Your only option is chartering a flight from Fairbanks at $500 plus, assuming weather's clear. Otherwise, you're stuck. You improvise, barter with neighbors, or suffer. Those are the options. Could you handle living somewhere that gets one major supply delivery per year? Yes. Or I get anxious when Target is out of my preferred paper towels. Let me know in the comments. And if seasonal isolation sounds brutal, our next town looked at 6 months of winter and said, you know what? We're just not going outside anymore. 1-3. Whittier, Alaska, the one building town. Whittier, Alaska, population 272, made a decision that captures what happens when isolation becomes so oppressive that architecture becomes survival strategy. They gave up on being a traditional town and moved almost everyone into a single building. The Begich Towers, a 14-story Cold War era concrete monolith, houses nearly the entire population. Inside this single structure, apartments, school, post office, health clinic, police station, small store, laundry, and church. You can live your entire life without stepping outside. In Whittier, that's not dystopian fiction, that's efficient planning. Whittier sits on Prince William Sound, surrounded by mountains. It's accessible by one route, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, a 2.5-mile single-lane tunnel shared with trains. The tunnel operates on a schedule, 15 minutes eastbound, 15 minutes westbound, then trains get their turn. It closes at night. If you're in Whittier after 10:30 p.m., you're spending the night. According to NOAA, Whittier receives 250 inches of snow annually. That's over 20 feet. Winter temperatures average 20 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but wind off Prince William Sound makes it brutal. Whittier has maybe 60 days of clear skies per year. The rest is rain, snow, fog, or some miserable combination that would make Seattle say, that's a bit much. The town exists because the US Army built it as a Cold War port. When the military left, the infrastructure remained. Begich Towers was military housing. Now it's civilian housing, and 300 people living in one building is treated as normal. It's like if a college dorm became a town and everyone just went with it. Rent runs $600 to $900 per month, which sounds cheap until you remember your neighbor isn't next door. They're in the same hallway. Your kid's teacher lives 2 floors up. The mayor lives on the 8th floor. There is no privacy. There is no escaping your community. One Reddit user described it perfectly. Living in Begich Towers is like a reality show where the challenge is, can you maintain boundaries when the mayor hears you vacuuming at 11 p.m.? Most people can't. Jobs are port-related, tourism, or government. Winter is economically and socially dead. The clinic handles basics, but anything serious requires going through the tunnel to Anchorage, 60 miles away. If the tunnel's closed due to avalanche risk, you wait. Avalanches here aren't theoretical. The mountains regularly shed massive snow. The tunnel has been closed for days during severe weather. Picture this: January in Whittier. You're inside Begich Towers, wind howling outside. You haven't seen sun in weeks. You walk down the hall to take your kid to school. In the elevator, you pass your landlord, your mayor, and the person you argued with at last week's community meeting. You can't avoid them. Later, text alert: tunnel closed due to avalanche danger. You were supposed to drive to Anchorage for groceries. Not anymore. You check your pantry and start rationing. Could be tomorrow. Could be a week. Whittier represents architectural surrender to extreme conditions. The town looked at Alaska winter and said, we can't fight this. We're consolidating. And now 272 people live in a vertical village where going outside is optional and community is mandatory. But at least in Whittier, the sun still rises every day. Our next town goes 67 days without seeing it. Number 2, Anaktavuk Pass, Alaska, the last light town. Anaktavuk Pass, population 348, sits in the Brooks Range inside gates of the Arctic National Park. For 67 days every winter, from mid-November through late January, the sun doesn't rise. This isn't Whittier's cloudy skies. This is polar night. The sun dips below the horizon in November and doesn't come back until late January. For over 2 months, you get either complete darkness or a few hours of dim twilight. No sunrise, no sunset, no golden hour, just dark. U.S. Census data shows Anaktuvuk Pass is an Inupiat community that's existed here for generations. The name translates to place of caribou droppings. When your ancestors named it, they focused on where can we find food rather than what sounds appealing to tourists. The village sits on a major caribou migration route. Subsistence hunting isn't tradition, it's survival. You hunt because the alternative is spending $12 on a gallon of milk flown in 3 days ago. Winter temperatures average minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, but regularly drop to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. At those temperatures, everything becomes difficult. Batteries die, engines won't start, skin freezes. If you go outside without proper gear, you don't risk frostbite. You guarantee it. Anaktuvuk Pass has no roads. The only access is by air. Small planes on a gravel airstrip when weather permits. Storms can shut down flights for days or weeks. When that happens, the village is completely cut off. The village has a school, health clinic, post office, and small stores. Anything serious medically requires a flight to Fairbanks, 250 miles south. That flight is weather dependent and costs thousands. If someone has a heart attack during a 3-day storm, they're dying in Anaktuvuk Pass. There is no backup plan. Everything comes by air. A gallon of milk costs $12 to $15, more per ounce than premium vodka. Fresh vegetables in winter are rare and expensive. Heating costs can exceed $1,000 per month. And here's what tourism brochures don't mention. The psychological toll of 2 months without sunlight is a documented public health crisis. The village has documented struggles with depression, substance abuse, and suicide during polar night. A teacher who worked here for 2 years. The first week of polar night, everyone's excited. By week 3, people are quiet. By week 5, you see it in their eyes. This crushing awareness that the sun isn't coming back soon. By week 7, you understand why humans weren't meant to live without light. Picture this. December in Anaktuvuk Pass. Dark for 3 weeks. The sun won't rise for another month and a half. Temperature minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. You step outside to check fuel drums and your breath freezes instantly into ice crystals that fall with tiny tinkling sounds. The village is quiet. No one moves unnecessarily. You go back inside and the walls close in. 6 more weeks of this. 6 more weeks of darkness, cold, isolation. Your satellite internet is down. Phone has 1 bar. You're alone with 347 other people trapped in the same darkness. And somehow that makes it worse. And if 67 days of darkness sounds like the absolute limit, our final town has nearly 5,000 people living through 65 days of it while dealing with the most extreme conditions in America. Where we won. Utqiagvik Barrow, Alaska, the edge of America. Utqiagvik, formerly Barrow, population 4,927, is the northernmost town in the United States. It sits on the Arctic Ocean, 320 miles north of the Arctic Circle. This isn't a tiny village. This is a functioning town with schools, a hospital, restaurants, stores, and nearly 5,000 people who decided that living at the edge of survivability is preferable to anywhere else. Let's start with darkness. Utqiagvik experiences polar night from mid-November through late January. That's 65 to 67 days where the sun doesn't rise. If Anaktuvuk Pass's 67 days sounded brutal, imagine that across nearly 5,000 people. It's not a village enduring darkness. It's a small city that's organized life around 2 months without sun. According to NOAA, average winter temperatures range from minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but wind chill regularly pushes that to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. The record low is minus 56 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. Frostbite isn't a risk. It's a certainty if you're unprepared. Utqiagvik is not accessible by road. No highways connect it to the rest of Alaska. The only ways in or out are by air or summer barge when the Arctic Ocean is navigable. Alaska Airlines runs regular flights from Anchorage, but winter storms can shut down the airport for days. When that happens, nearly 5,000 people are trapped on the edge of the continent. The cost of living is staggering. staggering. A gallon of milk costs $15 to $20, more expensive per ounce than craft beer, and you're not even getting drunk. A loaf of bread runs $8 to $10. A bag of apples costs $15. Most residents rely heavily on subsistence hunting, bowhead whale, caribou, seal, fish. This isn't cultural tradition for show, it's economic necessity. Feeding a family on store-bought groceries alone would cost $2,000 plus per month. Heating costs exceed $1,000 per month. Utqiagvik gets fuel deliveries by barge once a year during summer. The town stores massive quantities for winter. You're not paying to be comfortable, you're paying to not die. Utqiagvik has a hospital, but for serious medical issues, patients are med-flighted to Anchorage, 720 miles south. That flight costs tens of thousands. If weather's bad, the flight doesn't happen. You're stabilized and you wait. People have died waiting. The town has schools, a college, grocery stores, restaurants, even fast food. It functions like a small American town, except everything is harder, more expensive, and dependent on supply chains that can be severed by weather for weeks. Jobs are primarily with North Slope Borough government, oil fields at Prudhoe Bay, education, and healthcare. Median household income is around $80,000 to $90,000. Not wealth, but the minimum required to survive here. The population is predominantly Inupiat, indigenous people who've lived here for thousands of years. But there's also workers from outside who come for jobs or adventure. Some stay, most leave. The ones who stay long term are either deeply connected to the culture or have made peace with isolation that never ends. One long-term resident, people ask how I survive the darkness. I tell them you don't survive it, you adapt or it breaks you. There's no middle ground. By day 40 of polar night, you either understand why you're here or you're booking a flight south. Picture this. January in Utqiagvik. You wake at 8 a.m., completely dark. You go to work, dark. You come home at 5 p.m., still dark. The sun hasn't risen in 6 weeks, and won't for another 3. Temperature minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit with 40 miles per hour winds, creating minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill. You need groceries, so you bundle up. Parka, insulated boots, rated to negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Face mask, goggles, gloves so thick you can barely use your phone. You step outside and the cold hits like physical assault. Your breath freezes, your nose hairs freeze, your eyelashes freeze. You walk 3 blocks, moving fast because standing still is dangerous. Inside the store, you buy $200 worth of groceries that would cost $60 in Anchorage. You walk home. Inside, it takes 20 minutes to stop shivering. You look out at darkness and think about 2 more months of this. No sun, extreme cold, complete isolation if weather shuts down the airport. And yet, you stay because this is home, because 4,927 other people are making the same choice. Utqiagvik is the culmination of everything we've covered. The darkness of Anaktavuk Pass across thousands, the supply chain fragility of Tanana magnified, the architectural adaptation of Whittier spread across a real town, the geographic isolation of McCarthy, but where mistakes kill fast. This town struck a deal with winter. You can live here, but you'll pay in cold, darkness, cost, and isolation. And nearly 5,000 people looked at that deal and signed. Not because they're crazy, but because for some people, the cost of isolation is worth the price of belonging to a place that demands everything and gives back meaning. So that's the countdown. 6 American towns where winter means you're completely on your own. From Hyder's flooding road that severs access for weeks, to McCarthy's 60-mile path that becomes impassable for half the year. From Tanana's river freeze that stops supply chains cold, to Whittier's architectural surrender where 272 people moved into a single building. From Anaktavuk Pass's 67 days of darkness that test psychological limits, to Utqiagvik, the edge of America, where nearly 5,000 people live through 65 days without sun, in temperatures that kill the unprepared, at costs that would bankrupt most families. These aren't ghost towns or cautionary tales about economic collapse. These are functioning communities where people live, work, raise families, and make peace with the fact that winter isn't a season. It's a contract written in ice, darkness, and distance. The pattern is clear. Isolation in America isn't just about geography. It's about what happens when geography, climate, and infrastructure converge to create conditions where modern conveniences become impossible luxuries. Where just call 911 becomes hope the weather clears for a helicopter. Where run to the store becomes plan 6 months ahead or do without. The people in these towns aren't victims. They chose this. Some for cultural reasons, ancestral homelands occupied for thousands of years, some for economic opportunity, some because they prefer isolation to chaos, and some because after living on the edge, everything else feels too easy to matter. But the cost is real. Heating bills that exceed mortgages, grocery prices that require a second income just to eat, medical emergencies that become life or death gambles on weather, the psychological toll of months without sunlight, the knowledge that if something goes catastrophically wrong, help is hours away at best, impossible at worst. Could you do it? Could you live somewhere where winter means complete isolation, where your food comes once a year on a barge, where darkness lasts 2 months and temperatures make going outside a survival calculation, where your closest hospital is a $30,000 helicopter ride away? Yes, no, or I'd book a flight to Miami by day 3. Drop your answer in the comments. Tag someone who complains about winter because their driveway needs shoveling. They need perspective. If you made it this far, hit that like button because you now know more about American isolation than 99% of people. Subscribe because we're diving into places most channels won't touch. Share this with anyone who thinks roughing it means staying at a cabin without Wi-Fi. These towns exist. These people are real. Their choices are documented by the Census Bureau, and winter there isn't an inconvenience. It's a test of how much isolation the human spirit can endure before it either breaks or becomes something stronger. Thanks for watching. Stay warm, and maybe appreciate that when your biggest winter problem is scraping frost off your windshield, you're living in paradise.